Welcome back, everybody out there in podcast land. We are back with another iteration of Music That Matters on Different Strings, a guitar adjacent podcast. I am your host, Wes, and I'm here along with my friend Andy, who is your host. Say hello, Andy.
Hi, Andy.
And we're here on Music That Matters. But before we get into that, and it's Andy's choice this time, she's going to tell us how you can find us on the internet. And then we're going to get into this music stuff.
Yeah, so here we go. Find us at differentstringspodcast.com or email us questions or topic ideas at differentstringspodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Facebook at Different Strings Podcast. And if you're listening or watching on YouTube, please like, subscribe, hit the bell, comment, and do all the things. And then finally, please subscribe to Different Strings Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Back to you, Wes.
So last time on Music That Matters, I brought up the 1-2 punch from the 80s that was ZZ Top's Eliminator and Afterburner albums. And how closely tied together they were, not just in time, but in tone and feel and direction for such an iconic band that had a deep catalog already, including a half a dozen top 10 hits. We're making the transition this time to another 80s 1-2 punch, but you choosed it, even though we talked about it last time. I like to feel you were inspired by the previous discussion. So I'm going to let you take it from there and get us started on the Music That Matters 1-2 punch that is
Def Leppard's Pyromania from 1983 and Hysteria from 1987.
Woohoo!
I know. Such good records. I don't even know where do you
even start?
I know. So I thought, take a lesson from Wes.
I know how to start.
Go ahead.
Unten, Glieben, Glauben, Globen. That's where you start.
Oh, it's so beautiful. Oh, man.
That's my Mutt Lange impersonation for anybody that hasn't heard the album.
Yeah, so that was brilliant. I'll tell you where to start. You start with how these records actually performed. And if you're a Def Leppard fan, you probably should know some of this. Pyromania sold over 10 million copies, certified diamond in the US.
That something?
Over 10 million. And then they followed up with a record that sold over 12 million in the US and over 20 million worldwide. These were two very successful records. Okay.
Yeah.
The first one, Pyromania, had multiple top 40 singles on the Billboard Hot 100. We're talking Photograph. We're talking Rock of Ages. We're talking Foolin'. And then Too Late for Love.
You have to say it right. Foolin'.
Too Late for Love, Coming Under Fire. Billy's Got a Gun, Action Not Words. But just three, Rock of Ages, Photograph, and Foolin' were the top 40 singles on Billboard Hot 100. Three of them. Okay. Photograph peaked at 13. Rock of Ages at 16. But check this out. Hysteria had seven singles that cracked the Billboard Top 100. Love Bites, #1. Pour Some Sugar on Me, #2. Armageddon at #3. Hysteria, #10. Rocket, 12. Animal, 19. Only Women, the song Women, didn't crack the top 20 at #80. But 7 singles from one record, unheard of that I can recall. Okay.
Is that better than Michael Jackson's Thriller album?
Oh, I don't know, man. I wasn't prepared for that question. Go ahead, look it up. While you're looking that up, both of these records were done under the watchful ear of Mutt Lange. Okay. Mutt Lange produced both of these Um, and I'm sure you know a thing or two about Mutt Lange. He's
I
got
do.
a yeah, he's got a magic ear, that gentleman. Um, so
Point of order, Thriller had 7 singles on it.
okay,
They they all reached the top 10.
all reached the top 10.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Billie
that's
Jean
saying
had beat
something.
it, made number 1.
Okay.
So anyways,
So researching this record, I learned a couple of things. So the first thing was, now they recorded they recorded Pyromania with their original rhythm guitar player, or the original
Pete
guitar player,
Willis.
Pete Willis, right? Who was on High and Dry and On Through the Night, or I think they were called. So their first two records and
Yeah.
this one, Pete Willis was on.
And
Pete
I
Willis,
do believe Pete was the lead guitar player,
the
if
lead
I
guitar
can
player,
step in.
he
Yeah.
was.
But
Yep.
he recorded his rhythm tracks
He
on
recorded his
Pyromania.
Yep, he recorded his rhythm tracks and then got let go for alcohol abuse. He was replaced by the guitar player who continues to be with them today, Phil Collin. Phil Collin came in and then did all the solos. So when you're
Yes.
listening to when you're listening to Pyromania, you're hearing a lot of Pete Willis's rhythm guitar parts. When Hysteria happened, um, that was Phil was full time, and that's also, by the way, the last record to feature Steve Clark on guitar. He tragically
Yeah.
passed away after this record. Um,
From complications due to alcohol abuse, if I
yep,
remember correctly.
yep.
So
So
clearly alcohol was a huge problem with this
a
band in the
huge problem with
80s.
this band. Yep. Um, here's something else I learned about these two records. Um,
Yeah, this messed me up if you're going to talk about what I think you're going to talk about.
yeah. So, they were recorded in very unconventional ways. Usually, there's a couple ways you could record an album. One way is everyone records their parts all at the same time. Very rare,
Yeah.
but does happen. Um, Another way is you record scratch tracks on everything but the drums, and usually the drums and then maybe the bass get recorded, and then the guitars and vocals come after. That seems like a very typical. Not in this case. With both of these records, the 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 bass parts and then the guitar parts were recorded to a click track. The click track was provided courtesy of a Lynn LM1 drum machine. And then after the bass and guitars were done, it was only then that the drums were recorded. The drums came last. And apparently, the thought process was it gave the band flexibility to re record and rewrite parts of the song as they went along in the studio. Because if you think
Yeah.
about
And
it, once the
change the
drum
arrangements and all that
change the array,
stuff.
right? Because once the drums are there, the arrangement's set in stone.
Yep.
So they did both of the records like that. Here's something else I didn't know. So Hysteria took a very long time to come out after Pyromania. Mostly driven,
4 years.
4 years, mostly driven because of Rick Allen's infamous car accident that cost him one of his arms. So I thought that was the only reason that um, this album was delayed. It apparently was delayed because two members of the band got very sick, and also Mutt Lange had his own car accident as well, but not as bad as Rick's, where Rick lost his left arm.
Yeah.
So there was a bunch of things like that. Um, in addition, Hysteria, the drums for Hysteria were recorded. Now, I said they were recorded last. This is still true, but the drum sounds from this record were all sampled and played from a Fairlight CMI synthesizer.
Yeah. And
So the
let
drum
let me
samples, go ahead.
I was going to say, let me jump in here
Mhm.
because I always knew that the drums on Hysteria were sampled.
Mhm.
But I discovered an article with an interview from one of the engineers that
Mike
worked on both
Shipley.
albums, Mike
Mike Shipley,
Shipley.
yep.
Both albums were done with samples and sequencers for the drums on both albums. Both albums.
Not played live. Oh, both records.
Yeah, both samples and sequencers.
Wow.
I was absolutely stunned
Mm-hmm.
because I have always looked at the drums on Pyromania as like, what do you want your drums to sound like? Pyromania.
Right. It sounds very real, very, I would say organic, but not necessarily organic, but it doesn't sound sequenced in the slightest bit.
No, it doesn't. But part of that is probably that they recorded to a click.
Right. So, and the last, I guess, tidbit of trivia I'll give you is that
Okay.
The album Pyromania features two very prominent keyboard players, one uncredited. Tony Kaye, who you may know from Yes.
Phenomenally talented keyboard player.
He goes completely uncredited. And Thomas Dolby, who is
Tony
credited.
Kaye must have not want to have been caught slumming with a heavy metal band.
But Thomas Dolby, although credited, goes under a pseudonym of Booker T. Boffin.
Yeah, and these guys, like, these are not the guys you need playing keyboards on a Def Leppard record.
No.
You know, I mean, they must have owed Mutt a favor, or they were hard up for money or something. I mean, it's like, seriously, it's like having Jordan Rudess play with AC/DC.
Right. Exactly.
You know, like, it's just, it does it add something to the music? Absolutely. Does it need to be this phenomenally talented human being with, 72 fingers? No.
So,
they could have hired, at that point in 1982, they could have hired me to play keyboards on Pyromania.
Seriously. So let's talk about Pyromania first at this point when we talk about songs. So,
all right, let's do that.
This is a rock record. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is a rock record. And I mean, it's a commercial rock record, but if you recall the Circus Magazine articles of the day, then you may remember such comparisons to AC/DC. Like, Def Leppard was being touted as like this new wave of British rock.
Yeah.
Two guitars, which, insert euphemism here, but two guitars, it's screaming vocals, but they also had like great harmonies, and they were like anthemic. Their songs were all like, every song was like a sing along. It was like super fun and powerful. This was a rock record. Yup.
Great hooks.
Yup. Credit Mutt Lange where you must. But in 1983, their few albums rocked like this one. And then Hysteria comes after the accident where Rick loses his left arm, and you start thinking you've heard the last of Def Leppard. Then here comes Hysteria.
Right. Which is
the most highly produced corporate sounding record. And I don't even say that in like a derogatory jibe sort of way. I'm just saying, like, it redefined the genre entirely.
Yeah.
And it was so surgical. Like, not a note or an echo or a vocal part out of place.
Nothing out of place.
It was highly, highly surgical, corporate sounding. I mean, polished to the millionth degree.
And the Hysteria is the one that they use the Rockman for all the clean sounds, right?
For all the sounds, all the tones came from the Rockman. So if for those that don't know, the Rockman was a company, was called, well, Schultz R&D. So guitarist from Boston, Tom Schultz, was an electrical engineer. Brilliant, brilliant guy. And he set out to develop basically a new form of solid state amplification that would be, toneful and powerful, but still controllable in a live setting and no more tubes.
Yeah,
I mean, say what you will about the Rockman, it had its own sound. And
it
Tom
did.
Schultz used the Rockman on one of the last Boston records, and they wound up using it all over this record for all of the tones, clean and distorted alike. Mike Shipley, the engineer on the record, described that Rockman as a shitty little box with a god awful sound that had no real balls to it. Yes, that's what it was.
Yeah,
However, it also had the sound that they needed
yeah.
for this highly commercial record.
And
And
when you're layering and
mm-hmm,
stacking and all
yep,
that, you don't need an individual tone
right,
to have a lot of balls to it.
exactly. If they between Mutt Lang, this record, and the Rockman, it basically reshaped what rock music was supposed to sound like. And then all of a sudden, you started seeing Rockmans on all sorts of records. Um, Joe Satriani famously used it on at least the first couple solo records he
Yeah.
did.
Yeah, and you
Um,
can really hear it. I
and
don't think he used it as effectively as Def Leppard did.
I'm pretty sure ZZ Top used them. We talked about ZZ Top last
Mm.
week. Didn't they use the Rockman?
I don't know, to tell you the truth. I only know I've already forgotten, but I know they used that one hybrid guitar amp
Okay.
that had a solid state preamp and a tube power amp.
Yeah. So from a production perspective, these two records are very, very different. And yet, when you listen to them both, they still sound like Def Leppard, which
Yep.
is very interesting. Um, so did it pay off? I mean, did Mutt Lang's gambles pay off? That basically reinvented how to make a record. Arguably,
Yeah.
yeah. Like I said, over 20 million worldwide, sold over 12 million in the US, 7 singles. For a rock band, I mean, it's still one of the highest selling records today. It's
Yeah,
still
and I still hear these songs on classic rock radio.
they've re-released Hysteria multiple times with like
Yeah.
different versions of it, live versions and all this. It's just huge. I don't know a band today that plays 80s music that doesn't play at least Pour Some Sugar on Me, if not also Hysteria or Love Bites. It's just and to be clear, the last song to just to give you an idea of what they were about, Pour Some Sugar on Me, which landed at number 2 on the Billboard. That was the last song they did. It was an afterthought.
Yeah.
It was an
Yeah, I
afterthought.
remember seeing some video documentary where oh my God, what's the singer's name?
Joe Elliott.
Joe Elliott was playing a cassette of his original demo that he did for Pour Some Sugar on Me, like with an acoustic guitar and a a boom box where he just recorded it to get the idea down.
Mhm,
And you can hear the core of the song there,
mhm.
but you can also tell he does not really know how to play the guitar at that point, and he's
Right.
just kind of banging at it to make the sounds that he wants it to sound like. But to know that the song started as this, well, Mutt says we need one more song. Does anybody have anything? No, I haven't got anything. Have you got anything? Well, I got this one thing that I thought of. It's not very good, but here, and it ends up being one of their biggest hits,
That's right.
you know?
Huge. Um, so when you're talking about music that matters and why do these albums matter? I mean, I would say these two records basically cemented Def Leppard's place in the pantheon. I mean,
Oh, 100%.
even even as the the monolith that is Hysteria can almost make you forget about Pyromania, but Pyromania had some great songs on it,
It
not
did.
just
As a matter of
Photograph.
fact, Yeah, I'm looking at the track listing for Pyromania. Die Hard the Hunter is not the greatest song,
Hmm.
but it also does not suck.
That's right.
And I never liked Billy's Got a Gun. So the last song on each side,
Hmm.
I'm not a fan of.
But
But the
everything
other
else.
8 songs, you know, all bangers.
Yeah, Stage Fright is a great song.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, and
And
so
I'm noticing that Mutt gets songwriting credit on
uh-huh.
every single song. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, he was a big part of both of these records, and hard to believe or hard to argue that he was probably one of the reasons why that both of them did so well. Guys just
Yeah.
So I mean, why they matter in general, obviously, hugely successful. But I mean, why do they matter to me as a guitar player? Well, first of all, the guitar playing is phenomenal. Um,
Yeah.
it's
And it
they're
was
not.
really accessible. Like we could, I, it was Pyromania was one of the
Mhm,
first hair metal albums that I could play, that I could figure out on my own, even though it had been out a couple of years by the time I picked up guitar.
mhm,
Like I could figure out those riffs. I could play those songs because they weren't super fast. They weren't super intricate.
mhm,
They were catchy as hell.
mhm,
And I could make my amp sound, because I was using solid state amps then, I could make my amp sound almost like the record.
mhm. Yeah, they were fun albums to play, to listen to. Definitely shaped me as a guitar player. Um, and yeah, I call both of these records hugely influential in terms of playing and songwriting.
Yeah.
Still listen to them to this day. And I also think, look, there's something to be said for records that have been combined, 10 hit singles. Um,
Yeah.
they knew what they were doing. And, they're still at it to this day with Steve Clark. After he passed away, they got Vivian Campbell.
Mhm.
He's been at the, doing guitar duties with Phil Collins for decades now.
Yeah, I
Um,
think he's been in the band longer than Steve was.
yeah. And I'm not saying, I mean, I haven't really loved a whole lot of what Def Leppard has done since Hysteria. Not gonna lie to you, I don't feel like they ever recaptured it. How can you?
Yeah.
Um, but that's okay. They left their mark on rock music, and if honestly, if they had gone out after Hysteria, who could have blamed them?
Right.
I bet they could
But they
probably still retire
there's
on Hysteria money.
yeah, they're still putting out new music. They put a new album out in 2022,
Yep. Yep.
and they tour every year and they have a good time and it's a good show. And
Yep. So still doing it. But yeah, I absolutely, these two records are just so important to me as a musician, as a guitar player, and I do think that they
yeah.
matter. So what are your
And
thoughts on these that I didn't cover? Oh, you
well,
have one particular thought.
I do. I do. I have a banger. I'm still blown away to find out that the drums were sequenced
I
and recorded
know.
last. That absolutely blows my
I
mind.
didn't know that either until I started
I had
researching.
no
That's
idea.
crazy. I thought, Rick, when he lost his arm, he went to electronic drums. So my immediate thought was, well, they must have played the
Well, that's why
electronic drums in the
Hysteria, yeah,
studio.
exactly. But
Nope.
no, yeah, the drums were all sampled and the cymbals were all live, and you can play cymbals with one arm,
Yeah.
you know. Now, as a guitar player and one who was very into glam metal or hair metal or whatever we're supposed to call it now,
Uh-huh.
there were no two bigger albums than Pyromania and Hysteria.
Hmm.
I mean, these dominated everything. You could
Yeah.
listen to other stuff, but if you didn't have a copy of Pyromania, you were a poser, right?
Sure.
So, and by the time I started teaching guitar in 1988, Def Leppard had 4 top 10 singles in rotation on the radio.
That's
And
crazy.
I probably taught Pour Some Sugar on Me to half of my students and most of the rest of the songs on the album to easily a third. So saying I love these albums is underplaying it.
Hmm.
I do prefer Pyromania, but I'm going to tell you why. And this is the thing. I'm going to say it. Are you
Oh,
ready?
I hope so.
Hysteria is the album that killed hair metal.
What?
Yeah.
How do
So
you, hold on, let me get my mic and drop it. Why would you, why do you think
it
that?
is, well, it was so popular and remains
Yeah.
so to this day. It was
Uh-huh.
so meticulously produced that even though it really is a fantastically written album, it is a perfectly performed album, but it is so, you said this earlier, it is so corporate. This is the sound of a record label, right? This is they wanted this sound out there because it was so catchy. Hysteria is to the late 80s what Boston and Chicago and Styx were to the late 70s,
Hmm.
right? And it almost became a parody of the hair metal genre, if you give me a little leeway on that, because the heavy-handed production took out all the dynamics and created this massively iconic sound, but it's fatiguing. It's tiring to listen to. And having 7 songs from the same album on the radio for the better part of 5 years, three to 5 years, just wore people out. Right. So we're overexposed, overproduced. So in 1989, what comes out? Welcome to the Jungle. And within a year, Def Leppard albums were in the bargain bin. Nobody wanted that slick production anymore. Everybody wanted that raw sound, that raw attitude. I mean, it, let's be realistic between you and me and whoever's listening. By the time the tour for Hysteria started, it was already a huge album. Def Leppard wasn't hungry anymore. I'm not slagging them. They earned every bit of their fame through hard work and dedication. They've earned every penny they've ever made from selling these 2 albums. So I'm not cheesing on them or anything. They earned everything they got.
Uh-huh.
They worked hard, they were dedicated, they put out fantastic albums. But this is America, Andy, and we love an underdog.
Okay.
Once you get to the top of the mountain, we turn away and we ignore your slide down the other side, no matter how long it takes. We turn our attention to the next scrappy little bastard who's scrambling their way to the top of the mountain, and that was Guns N' Roses. Now, think about that. What Guns N' Roses did, that was like setting off a grenade in music.
Okay.
And then the extrapolation of that attitude and that raw production style, grunge. And no more, boom, gone. Hair metal's off the radio, it's off of MTV. It like took 2 weeks and it was done.
Mm-hmm.
And then the cycle repeated to the point where, we have very few bands from the grunge era that are still around, still making new music. Pearl Jam is still putting out new music. And the rest of them are touring as nostalgia acts and rarely do anything. And
It's
I,
weird,
I,
but as you said, Pearl Jam, all I could think of is the lead singer from Soundgarden is gone. The lead singer of Alice in Chains is gone. The
yeah,
lead singer from Stone Temple Pilots is gone. Like grunge was the era of, I mean, I hate to
yeah.
say
What
it, but
the
like,
80s had alcohol and the 90s had drugs.
yeah, bad and
Yeah,
depression.
yeah.
Um, but
And like you, I haven't really dug anything that Def Leppard has done since Hysteria. And I listened to both of those albums. I usually listen to them one right after the other, you know,
yeah,
while I'm working, I'll turn them on and I turn them up.
yeah.
Um, but while I was doing this, I found out that they did an album of covers.
They did.
They did, um, which I'm not morally opposed to. I used to be a real dick about bands that did albums of covers, but now that I understand a little bit more how royalties work, um, I don't begrudge them that anymore,
Okay.
because it is a way for a big band like Def Leppard to give back to the bands that meant a lot to them when they were kids. But they covered a very beautiful piano ballad called Dear Friends
Oh boy.
from Queen's third album. And I want you, when we're done here, I want you to go on YouTube and listen to the original, and then listen to the Def Leppard version,
And then
and
text
you
you.
you will understand why I don't forgive them ever for that. And if I ever see them, I'm going to slap whoever's idea it was to do that version of that
Uh,
song,
that's a
because it
shame.
is legitimately terrible.
Uh,
Now, I'm not saying
okay.
that about the whole album. I'm saying that about one song that was so bad it didn't even make the original cut for the album. It was like an outtake that they put out later.
Oh,
But
okay.
Pyromania and Hysteria, hugely, hugely huge albums. It's hard. I don't think you can even overstate their effect on guitar players in the 80s,
Right.
you know? And one of my favorite songs isn't even on those albums, which is funny. One of my favorite songs is from High and Dry. It's excuse me. It's called Bring It On the Heartbreak.
Yeah.
Such a great song, but
Yeah.
it's transmitting where they're going,
Yeah.
because the rest of that album is not amazing. You've got On Through the Night, you got Let It Go, which are both really good. You got Another Hit and Run, which is pretty good, but the highlights there are Bring It On the Heartbreak and On Through the Night. And then it's like they took those two songs and they wrote two albums of songs better than that,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Bringing
know?
on the Heartbreak was heavy and had great harmonies. Like you could hear the future Def Leppard in that.
Yeah. And I one is still one of my favorite songs to play on the guitar is Too Late for Love from Pyromania, because
Hmm.
it's such a cool riff, and once again, it's easy to play. That was the first song off that album that I learned.
Okay. Dope. Well, I'm glad we
Dope.
brought both of these up. These 1-2 punches, this one and then last time ZZ Top.
Yeah.
So before we go, one more time, please visit us, differentstringspodcast.com. Email your questions or topic ideas, differentstringspodcast@gmail.com. We're on Facebook, Different Strings Podcast. If you're on YouTube, like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, comment, and do all that stuff. And then wherever you listen to podcasts, please subscribe to Different Strings Podcast. That's
Bye.
it. Have a good night. Bye.